for the entire college to participate in a training, diversity training that we're having that's available for the entire college. If you are not needing to speak right now, I'd ask you to mute your Zoom, and you can do that mute at the bottom of your screen. If you click on the bottom, there'll be a piece that comes up where there's a microphone, and you should just click on that, and that will mute so we don't get background noise from others who are on the call with us. Pleased to have so many of you joining. This is for those of you who are not part of Cooperative Extension, this is our typical first Friday of the month call where we connect about organizational things and professional development opportunities that we have going on. And this is going to be a unique two-part series, and is part of our commitment that we have as a college and as Cooperative Extension to diversity and in diversity efforts and among the college. And I'm pleased to have with us today Jennifer Daniels. And Jennifer does a lot of training and comes highly recommended for our staff. And she serves in the role of our Office of Equity and Inclusion, and we are pleased to have her with us today for this session. She's doing her first Zoom presentation, and so we're pleased to have her joining us. She's done some training with Alice and gotten all set up, and I'm going to turn it over on behalf of Tanya Gressley, who's also working with diversity in our college, as well as myself with the diversity initiatives we have in Cooperative Extension. Jennifer, we're pleased to have you joining us and doing some training for us in the college. And just going to turn it over to you. We have over 38 participants on the call today, and there may be more. Some might be joining us as a group and in one room, but have just one computer identity. So Jennifer, we're going to turn it over to you. You can share your screen,
okay,
and interact with the staff that are on this training, and we'll appreciate hearing from you in this new way. So thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be doing this. This is really awesome and cool, and I'm excited to really be able to have this outreach and talking about what's really important for our campus, for our university, and for our office in the Office of Equity and Inclusion. So as Michelle mentioned earlier, my name is Jennifer Daniels, and I am the Associate Director in the Office of Equity and Inclusion, and I am a big part of our diversity inclusion efforts and training here on campus. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what we're doing here as an office, and then I'm going to bring you a nice presentation. It'll be a little bit different because generally speaking, I do a lot of interaction, so most of you should have the activity that I have for groups. Generally, this is when I'm looking for feedback or questions. We do have that option for you to be able to type in your questions or concerns, or if you would like to unmute yourself to ask me a question, please feel free to do that. But I hope that this is a fun and productive hour. So I will go ahead and pull up the presentation so that we can go ahead and get started. Give me 1 second. Alrighty, okay, so everyone should be seeing that presentation here up top, the ABCs of diversity. Now, we started a 4-part series for the university called Creating a Positive and Inclusive Campus Climate. And this is a part of that series. Really what we want to do is highlight diversity, how it's going to make us stronger, why it makes us better, and really talk about some of the things that can inhibit us from really creating an inclusive work climate or campus climate. So we'll go ahead and get started. Now first, if we can click. There we go. First, I want to tell you guys just a little bit about our office and what we're doing, what we're charged with doing. You'll hear, as most of you should know, there's a lot of acronyms at the University of Delaware. So when you hear us say OEI, that's talking about obviously the Office of Equity and Inclusion. We are in charge of Title IX and affirmative action compliance. We oversee all of those processes within our office. We also serve as a place to be able to have any conversations on discriminatory harassment. You can come informally, you can come private and confidentially. We do not move things forward unless you give us that permission to do so, but we definitely serve as a resource for the campus community. Of course, our office is in charge of all of the diversity and inclusion education and awareness, and then we support the 9 diversity caucuses here on campus, and that's just giving you a little blurb in case some of you did not know what we do in OEI. So now kind of moving into the overview, what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to specifically discuss why diversity is important, how it makes us stronger. We'll go into what exactly is diversity. There's a lot of misconceptions about that, and we're going to kind of clarify when we say diversity here at the University of Delaware, what that means. We'll talk about how we as individuals intersect with diversity. We'll talk about cultural competency and sensitivity, and then of course I'll leave you with a few takeaways before we finish, basically what I would like for you to gather from this training, from this workshop. So going directly in for the beginning, let's talk about why diversity is important. Now, what I don't have in here, because for me, it goes without saying, diversity is important because all individuals, irrespective of your background, where you're from, what you look like, what you do, all individuals should feel valued and included and respected within our environments. So that's just kind of a basic principle that I didn't put up here, and that's more of the moral, ethical standpoint of diversity. It's just the right thing to do to include people. But now let's go a little bit further as to why it's important for our university and why it's important for our work environments. First, as most of you may know, we follow behind the strategic plan, Delaware Will Shine, and within that is a diversity action plan that's headed by Dr. Carol Henderson, who is the Vice Provost of Diversity. Essentially, we follow behind her charge, which is to include, have an inclusive and welcoming campus climate, and you'll see that that's a strategic initiative number 1. We move into the next point. Why is diversity important? Well, by 2025, we're expected to have not only the largest, but the most ethnically diverse freshman class in history. And so I know many of you may be thinking, well, you know, I don't work with students, so how does this affect me? Well, quite simply, this freshman class, within 4 years, they'll be in the workforce with us. So that means not only is this freshman class expected to be the most ethnically diverse, we're going to be expecting to be working with a very diverse class once these students graduate from college and again enter the workforce. Moving even further, how does diversity make us stronger? Quite simply, it challenges our academic and social growth. When we include different perspectives, different ways of taking on perspectives, it's going to strengthen the way that we problem solve. And we'll go a little bit more into that in this next slide. So let's talk about the value in difference and essentially the value of diversity. Again, as I said before, when we have diversity, we are including all different types of ways of thinking that challenge us. We are able to better adapt, right? When we have diversity within our workplace, quite simply, we can adapt better to the clients or the services that we're giving to various individuals. So when we are better able to adapt, we will have a greater impact with our services and what we're doing for our jobs. It increases our scope, and as I said before, it's just going to strengthen the way that we're able to problem solve. Moving into that next point of cross-pollination, some of you business background individuals might understand this terminology, but for those of you that don't, I'll kind of give you a little bit more clarification. Cross-pollination, when we're talking about that, essentially is saying we're going to be including different viewpoints and vantage points, different types of skill sets. When we bring and mesh those all together, well, quite simply, it's going to have influence on one another. One, because we're humans, we all like to be right. That's normal, right? However, when we have yes people around us, people that think the same way that we do, it doesn't challenge us to really think further into our solutions. However, if we have to diverge, it if you will. If we have two divergent opinions, well, quite simply, in my efforts to try to articulate or strengthen my own base, it's going to, by you challenging me on that, it's going to have me looking at my skill sets, looking at the way that I'm problem solving in a more critical way. Very important. The example that I want to use here is the founder, Edward Jenner, of the vaccination for smallpox. Now, I don't know if you all know this little fun fact. This was something that I was researching on my own. So Edward Jenner, obviously a scientist. This was during the time when smallpox was very prevalent, and at the time there was no cure, no vaccination. He overheard his milkmaids speaking about the smallpox. And what he heard them saying was, well, I had the cowpox, so I'm not going to get smallpox. Everyone knows when you have cowpox, you don't get smallpox. It was Edward Jenner, of course, a researcher, a scientist. If he had not taken the opportunity to listen to this diverse perspective, right, the most unlikely perspective, we would not have the vaccination for smallpox. What he found in listening to that unlikely group is that if you had cowpox, if you did have inoculated cowpox, it was a protection against smallpox. And that's where he found that solution for that vaccination. And that's just a small example to bring to a head, but really shows how when we include different perspectives and ways of attacking problems, it only strengthens our own base and essentially can make us smarter, if you will. We'll keep going. And again, if you guys have any questions or concerns, please feel free to send in a chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask a question. I'm absolutely open to you guys interjecting as we continue on. So let's keep going. Let's talk a little bit more about the value of diversity. Now, I have statistics here, and this is saying how diversity enhances your team, but I have to be very clear in bringing this about. When we say there's a difference between having diversity and leveraging diversity. When we have diversity, what that means is, okay, I have 5 yellow people, 3 red people, 2 purple people, and 1 blue person, right? That's having diversity. But when we leverage diversity, what does that mean? Essentially, it's saying, what are we doing? What systems do we have in place so that every individual of whichever group they represent has an opportunity to be successful within our organization? That's the difference between having diversity and leveraging diversity. So when I'm talking about these statistics that you see here on the screen, we're talking about when companies and units and organizations leverage diversity. So how does it enhance us? Well, quite simply, people are just going to be happier. You're going to have an increased employee morale and satisfaction, and individuals are going to want to contribute more to our organizations. When we have happy employees, quite simply, we're going to have happy customers. So as you can see right here, 39% customer satisfaction is going to increase. Our employee efficiency, we're going to work harder. We're going to be more focused. We're going to be in tune with our jobs. And when, again, our employees are happy, quite simply, they don't want to leave. So our employee turnover rate is going to decrease when we are leveraging diversity. Let's move a little bit further and let's talk specifically about, well, what is diversity? What is diversity? And we have to be honest here. Oftentimes when we mention diversity, immediately everyone jumps to ethnic diversity, where you're talking about ethnic minorities, or you're talking about underrepresented groups such as ethnic minorities. That is not all diversity. Is it part of diversity? Absolutely. It is a part of diversity, but it is not all diversity. When we say diversity here at the University of Delaware, we are talking about all forms of human difference. What you see here below, this is the 4 layers of diversity, also known as the wheel of diversity. And this is a great way to explain what exactly is diversity. Clearly, centered right here within this wheel is personality. Before we even move further, the basis of who we are, how we interact, how we communicate, how we perceive and receive from others goes intrinsically to personality. That dominates everything. Let's just think about an arbitrary example, thinking of an individual who may be more shy or of an introvert compared to those that are extroverts. Well, quite simply, those two different types of individuals will absolutely have a various comfort level as far as interacting or even dealing with contention or conflict. So starting first innermost at personality, and then moving into this second layer here that you see, the internal dimensions. So we have age, gender, sexual orientation, physical ability, ethnicity, and race. What I want you to think about with this part of the will is how, based on, let's take another example. We could have two individuals that are the same ethnicity, but come from different generational backgrounds. Let's think about how that's going to influence individuals. Let's think about our baby boomers compared to how they may interact, or how millennials may interact or perceive the world. You're going to get a lot of difference there. You're going to get a lot of difference. Even moving that out just a little bit further, going into marital status or physical ability. Actually, that's the second layer. Educational background, again, or even religion or income. Again, all of that's going to have an effect on the individual. Who you are in the world, where you fall within this will, absolutely affects your vantage points and perspectives, the types of choices that you make in decision making, and in many instances, your opportunities for success. Again, I want to highlight just an example so I can talk to you just about how this shapes our vantage point. Let's think about two women who may be the same ethnicity, but one has a single parent household, okay, while the other may be married. The single parent family or the single parent household may have disabled children, whereas the married family may not have disabled, they have able-bodied children. How is that going to affect what's important in life, or what your challenges and barriers that may occur? Ultimately, what I want you to see here is that within this will, even for those of us that are the same age or are the same gender, or perhaps we're of a different sexual orientation, it's going to impact the way that we see and understand our world. And that's the first step in trying to better understand diversity. When we go a little bit further into this workshop, we will talk about how your own identity impacts the world. But one, just showing you this will for you to have the understanding of, okay, well, where do I fall within this will? And how has that impacted my life? How has that impacted my experiences and what I find to be true of my world? All I simply want you to know with this will is that every individual is going to be different, and trying to take the opportunity to understand someone from where they come from and what their background is absolutely the first step in trying to create a more inclusive environment. Okay, we're going to keep going until I hear a question or someone throwing a chat in. I'm going to just keep rolling. We have an hour, and I want to make sure that we're able to cover everything. So now let's move into some of these diverse groups. And the first that we're going to talk about here is gender diversity, okay? And it's important to speak to this, and I'll tell you why in a short moment. So when we first talk about gender, we have to speak about gender roles. And so for some of you that may be wondering, well, what are gender roles? What does that mean? Essentially, that's the way that society tells men and women how they should behave or act, what's appropriate and not appropriate, so on and so forth. We are groomed with gender roles literally as soon as we were born. Let's even think about it. When we have a fresh newborn baby, what color do the boys get? Well, what color do the girls get? You all know the answers to this, of course, but that's just a small example. Let's take that even further with how we treat our little boys, how we treat our little girls, right? Our little boys, boys will be boys, right? They can be rough and tough, and we expect them to get dirty, right? That's what boys do. But not little girls, though. They're not always extended that same type of leniency, right? Little girls should be cooperative and nice and pretty, right? And we wear dresses, and we're supposed to get along with people and be helpful. These are things that we condition from our society onto men and women very early on. And so now you may be wondering, okay, well, what does this have to do with the work environment? Well, quite frankly, our gender roles absolutely intersect into the workplace. You have something called gender stereotypical positions, okay? And so a gender stereotypical position for a man would be a CEO or a mathematician or a scientist or a surgeon, if you will. A stereotypical position for a woman would be a nurse or a teacher, some type of aide, anything that's caretaking, if you will. What studies have shown, when we cross those gender stereotypical positions, so for example, when women take on stereotypical men positions, studies have shown that even when they do well within these positions, they are rated lower on their interpersonal skills. And so an example of that, let's think about that tough woman boss, right? And she's a tough boss, may exhibit the same types of characteristics that a man may exhibit in leadership that's necessary for being a successful leader. However, the woman gets called a witch. I changed that to a W. We're at work, guys, okay? But a woman's called a witch. Oh, she's a witch. She's too tough. I don't really like her. She's not very nice. The same goes for men as well. When men take on those gender stereotypical positions and they do well in those positions, again, they are rated lower on their interpersonal skills. So what you'll generally hear is, oh, he's too nice, or he's too soft, right? He's too soft of a guy. He's not really a man's man. These are the things that are being said up when we cross those gender stereotypical positions. When we move a little bit further, talking about the motherhood penalty, what this is saying is that women who have families or who have children are deemed to be less committed to their jobs, which has often been used as a way to not promote or allow women, the glass ceiling, if you will, allow women into higher positions. Men, studies have showed, are not penalized in the same way when they have families. So what I'm saying here, when we're talking about gender diversity, it's important to understand, are we rating individuals based off of their true skills and what they are exemplifying, or are we using our gender roles or what our influence on gender roles are and judging individuals based off of that, which we don't want to do. This goes down to our hiring practices when we say, okay, well, I want a man for this job, or I want a woman for this job. I only like to hire women for these types of jobs. We have to be mindful of that and ensuring, again, that we are not letting our gender roles intersect into the workplace. As you see those little caricatures at the bottom, just to shed a little light and bring light to this, you see on the left-hand side, a man sitting across from a woman saying, sorry, you're simply not the right man for the job. And of course, the picture to the right, you see the gender line, do not cross, nurses station. And obviously you have the women on one side and the men on another. And that's just a small example that we want to bring forward here. Let's move on. Excuse me. So now we're going to talk about LGBTQ diversity. So for those of you that don't know, the L is for lesbian, the G for gay, B for bisexual, T for transgender, and Q for questioning or queer. When we talk about the LGBTQ community, what's important to understand first about this community is understanding the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation. When we're talking about gender identity, what does that mean? That's essentially saying how a person will identify. I identify as a woman. I am a woman, I identify as a woman. However, with gender identity, an individual can be born biologically a man or biologically a woman and identify as a woman. So you can be born biologically a man, but identify as a woman. That's when we're getting into transgender, okay? That's when we're talking about transgender. Or you can be biologically born a woman, but identify as a man. When we move into sexual orientation, well, what does that mean now? Essentially, we're saying, whom are your romantic feelings toward, or who are your sexual attractions toward? So two women being attracted to one another, that they would identify as lesbian. Two men as gay or bisexual, meaning you could have both preferences of dating men or women. Okay, so that's what we mean by sexual orientation. What's important to understand here with gender identity and sexual orientation, it is not for us to try to prove or understand someone else's identity. Self-disclosure, meaning that individual disclosing their identity or orientation, is completely up to that individual. We cannot have any say-so or latitude as it relates to people's identities or sexual orientations. And again, it's important because when we talk about LGBTQ diversity, of course, there's a lot of controversy over that. And we're not saying, I'm not saying, our office is not saying that you cannot have your own personal values, because you are allowed to that. But what we are saying is that it's not okay to then place those values on people around you, right? Or to try to condemn individuals because we disagree with it. That's when it's not okay. Again, it's for that person's personal preference and their own self-disclosure. Let's move into heterosexual privilege. And so I know many of you may be saying, well, what is heterosexual privilege? And I'm heterosexual and I don't have heterosexual privilege. Well, you do, and I'm going to explain why. When you talk about heterosexual privilege in general, what does that mean? That means there are many privileges that we're afforded as heterosexual people that many people of the LGBT community may not be afforded. What's an example of that? Me, as a heterosexual woman, I do not have to worry about people having a look of disdain or disapproval if I'm holding hands with my partner while I'm walking through the grocery store or I'm at the mall. I don't have to worry about people giving me nasty faces or being uncomfortable if my partner were to give me a kiss on the lips or a peck on the cheek, or I wanted to display some type of public display of affection. Moving that, so those are examples of our privileges. And quite frankly, up until a year ago, last year, heterosexual privilege was being able to have the right to get married. That was a privilege that heterosexual people had, that many people of the lesbian, gay, and bisexual community did not have a privilege to do. I want to move this a little bit further to break this down in terms of how we work within our environment. So before I started working in OEI, I worked in the faculty staff assistance program, where I was doing a lot of counseling with different faculty and staff. And at the time, I had a client who was a faculty woman who identified openly as a lesbian woman who was getting married last summer. She was getting married. And she had a colleague within her unit as well, within her college, that was also getting married, who happened to be a heterosexual woman. Now, her colleague was getting married before her. Literally, it was about 2 months apart. So when her colleague, it was about a month before her wedding, the entire office or unit threw a wonderful bridal shower. Okay, sounds like a really nice thing to do. There were cake pops and cake and balloons. She received gifts and lots of well wishes and congratulations. It was a huge event. Everyone within that unit was invited to her bridal shower. My client, again, who identified as the lesbian woman, moving forward for her training, for her bridal shower, when it came to a month before her wedding, no bridal shower. No congratulations, no cake, no balloons, no gifts, nothing at all. She didn't get anything. So in a moment like that, we have to think, well, how did it make that woman who was lesbian, how do we think that made her feel? Well, I can tell you quite simply, and I'm pretty sure you could gather this as well. It made her feel excluded, not valued, right? Because essentially the nonverbal of a situation like that is saying, well, we are going to value and celebrate this heterosexual marriage, but when it comes time for your marriage, in which you're marrying your partner who happens to be a woman, we won't celebrate that. And again, these are just small practices that we use in our office or amongst one another, where we are unintentionally or intentionally excluding individuals. So it's something to be mindful of. What's most important to know about this LGBTQ group is keeping appropriate boundaries, asking appropriate questions, and using appropriate language. Now, some of you may be wondering, okay, well, what do you mean appropriate boundaries and questions? You'd be surprised. Asking anyone about their sexual preference or how they like to have sex, whether you're a top or a bottom. I repeat these things because these are things that people have told me have been said to them as a part of the LGBT community. Never okay, never okay. We would not do that to a heterosexual person. And hey, over lunch break at the water cooler, I'm asking you about, yeah, so how was your sex last night? Kind of weird, right? Yes, I know, it feels uncomfortable. I feel awkward even saying it right now, but it's something that we have to speak about. Again, self-disclosure is very important here. It is not for us to understand or to question someone's private and personal life in that regard. Having appropriate language. And again, this is something very specific to talk about as the LGBTQ diversity. When we talk about language with ethnic minorities, okay, or African Americans or Hispanics, so and so forth, we are all very clear in not using derogatory language. We all know using the N-word, not okay, right? Calling a woman the C word or a B word, again, not okay. We're very mindful of the type of language that we use for these different underrepresented groups. However, the same applies when we're talking about the LGBTQ group. A small example that I'm going to use here, years ago, and even still current till today, the phrase, oh, that's so gay, right? Or, oh, you know, that's so gay. When people use that language, they're using it to communicate a type of derogatory feeling, right? You're saying something is so gay because either you don't like it or you think it's stupid. But let's think about how individuals that are a part of this community, how would they feel if they heard someone using their identity group in a disparaging way? Well, quite frankly, you're going to feel not valued in that incident. So it's important to do that. Just as the same as with disabilities, we wouldn't say, oh, you're so retarded or that's so retarded. That's the same concept. We have to be mindful of the way that we speak about one another and almost think in that essence, if I was a part of any of these groups as a woman or LGBTQ or an ethnic minority, and someone used my identity to speak disparagingly about something, well, how would I feel about that? Chances are you're not going to feel that great. So it's important to remember that when we're talking about appropriate language and boundaries. Moving in now to cultural diversity. Now, again, this is something where when we're talking about cultural diversity, immediately everyone jumps to ethnicity. And while ethnicity is important, an important part of cultural diversity, there are many other factors, as you can see here, that represent our culture and who we are. Even one that I don't have in here, this is not an exhaustive list, but nationality, right? That's a huge part of our culture and who we are. When we think about being American, well, in American culture, we are told to pick yourself up by the bootstraps, go out there and fight for your individualism, right? We all want to be successful and you do it for you. That is the American way of doing things. But if we take that a little bit further and think about other nationalities. So for example, in many Asian cultures, while American culture is very individualistic, many Asian cultures, nationalities, are more pluralistic or collectivistic. And so what that means, when we say family in American terms, we think of immediate family. We think of our children. We think of our mother, our father, right? Spouse. That's family. And these Asian cultures, when you say family, and many of them, it includes anyone that's related to you, second cousins, first cousins, grandparents, aunts, uncles. So when we talk about these individuals who intersect into our society, for them, having that individualistic mind frame is not something that they're accustomed to. They're more accustomed to operating within groups, operating for a bigger entity. And that's just a small example of how we can have some difference there. Let's go a little bit further. Based off your culture, right, which includes but is not limited to your age, socioeconomic status, religion, gender, it's going to bring about a different set of values and a different way of behaving because of these values, because of these culture. What happens in the workplace? Oftentimes we can run into communication issues, and often we can run into more so an insensitivity of what motivates one another because it's different. And we ignore each other's motivations. Well, we think, well, I'm motivated by this, so you must be motivated by this as well. That is not the case. Every individual is going to be different. As you can see here in this last point, we're talking about integration and assimilation. What's the difference with that? When we say assimilation, which can happen in any dominant group, it's essentially saying, if you are different from the majority, we expect you to fit in with us. You should do things the way that we do things. That is assimilation. When we talk about integration now, which is more ideal of what we want, it's saying, okay, we can all bring in our individual or respective differences, but we're not going to make you take those things away because essentially that is who you are. When you assimilate, it's saying we want you to drop your identity at the door and confirm to the majority group. What's an example of assimilation? When we hear individuals saying, this is America, you should be speaking English. That is a perfect example of assimilation. Why do you need to speak English? I mean, of course, and I see a question, I'm going to get to that in one short moment. But of course, when we're talking about assimilation, now if we're talking about in a business sense and we're working with customers, yes, you should speak English. But let's say your coworkers are Spanish speaking and on their lunch break, they want to speak Spanish with each other. That is perfectly okay. Asking them not to do that, that's assimilation. What's an example of integration? Well, quite simply, when we're talking about integration now, that's saying an example of that could be instead of calling our holiday break the Christmas party or a Christmas party, essentially the holiday party. Because let's think about all Hanukkah. Let's think about all of the different Kwanzaa, Christmas, all of the different holidays that are being celebrated during the end of the year. So instead of focusing on Christianity and Christmas, including other holidays, the holiday party, that includes everyone. I'm going to go ahead and jump in for a quick question. Hi there, and I'm going to read this. Okay, yes, never mind. I'm sorry about that. This is supposed to be private, but never mind. We'll get back to that. Yes, you can absolutely email me. So let's move on. Now, we're going to go to the next one, and I'm moving quickly, guys, so just bear with me. Let's talk about ability diversity. What is a disability? First and foremost, a disability could be a plethora of things, including but not limited to any type of mental health, medical health, or physical impairment that causes one's quality of life to somehow be different from those that do not have those same types of deficiencies, okay? And I use deficiencies in a way that it has impact on quality of life. When we talk about invisible disabilities versus visible disabilities, okay? Most oftentimes our society is more so concerned with the visible disabilities. I see you in a wheelchair, or I see that you have some type of, or I can tell that you're using a walker or a cane, right? In some sense, that's a visible disability. But oftentimes what gets overlooked are our invisible disabilities because, well, you don't look like you have a disability. Our invisible disabilities are going to be our medical concerns, individuals that may be combating diabetes or people that are dealing with depression or anxiety. Or even have mental learning disabilities. Those are all examples of invisible disabilities, and we cannot presume that just because I don't see it, that you're perfectly abled or that you do not have anything that is a barrier for you. That's important to understand that. What we need to know about ability diversity or working with individuals at all that have any type of disability, they can absolutely lead a full productive life. That's important to know. I have to share my own example in this and how I used my own abled body bias towards someone that had a disability. About a year ago, I went to an all-inclusive resort, and there was an individual in front of me who was in the buffet line who was in a wheelchair. So my intentions were well, I'll explain that in a second, thinking that I'm being helpful. I go, I grab his plate and say, oh, let me fix your food for you. And he immediately snatches the plate back out of my hands, which of course I had the shocked face in this moment, like, oh, wow, like he was angry. And he essentially told me, I don't need your help. If I needed it, I would have asked. Thank you, but no thank you. And that's just a small example, because in my mind, again, with my able body bias, I'm thinking, well, I have all use of my limbs. You're in a wheelchair. You need my help. I should be able to do something for you. And in essence, I didn't need to do anything for him at all. What's important to know, again, about these groups and working with disabilities is that we should allow those individuals, if they want help, we can offer. But if they say no, then we have to check our emotions at the door and be okay with whatever they decide for themselves. People with disabilities can lead full, productive lives. If you have questions about accommodations or the law as it relates to disabilities, of course, we have our Office of Disability Support, so please feel free to contact them for more information if you have questions. Let's keep moving. This is everyone's favorite. This is my favorite. Let's go lastly into talking about generational diversity. So as it stands right now, we have 4 different generations in the workplace, okay? Our traditionalists, baby boomers, Generation X, and our millennials. And we have just a wide smorgasbord of how we view life and how we like to get along in groups and what's our easiest way for communication. I can tell you right now, I am a millennial and my boss is a baby boomer. And when I tell you, we talk about feedback, okay, millennials, we love feedback. Am I doing good? Am I doing great? Am I doing bad? Mediocre, hot, cold, warm? Where am I? Where my boss is like, oh, come on, Jen, seriously. Like, you're doing, everything's fine. Everything's fine, right? So we kind of have that difference between us in the way that we like to receive feedback. And that's just a small little example. But what I want you to think about here, and now, of course, this is a generalization of these different groups. There are exceptions to every rule all of the time, okay? And people will fall different within this spectrum. But what we want you to identify here within this group is, how can I better communicate with someone that's a different generation, from a different generation than I am? How can I understand these different groups? Well, quite simply, by asking and then meeting someone in the middle. Both of you, it takes 2. If I know that you like to overly communicate and I don't really like to communicate, we can find a middle ground and being able to work that out. That's a small example. So now we're going to go into an activity, okay? And you're going to do this as an individual, and I'm going to explain to you, you should all have those sheets with you, and I'm going to give you about 7 minutes or so to complete this, and then we'll come back into the presentation. But I would like to share with you, in full disclosure, my own sheets so you can get an idea of what I'm looking for here when you fill out these sheets. So this is my cultural programming. What I have on the insides of the circle, and I was trying to point at the circle like you could see me, but you can't, so I'm going to use the cursor. Sorry about that. What I have on the insides of each of these circles, okay, are the various things in my life that have impacted my value systems, okay? And it's important to understand and talk about these things. Now, all of us are going to have different cultural programming. That's what we call it. Who are the people? What are the things? What are the experiences that somehow impacted who you are today as an individual? For myself, and just to explain a couple of my bubbles here, my graduate degree, okay, I was saying going through grad school had a huge impact on my value system. For me, the values that I learned from grad school were it creates opportunity and work ethic. It was one of the hardest things I ever had to work for, was getting my graduate degree. I worked really hard for that. Let's look at my profession. I'm a social worker by trade. So for me, what the value that I learned from becoming a social worker was serving the underserved, pluralism, and inclusion. Let's think about how someone else that has a different career path, let's say something completely opposite. Let's think of some type of CEO banker, right? how might their values be different, their work values be different from my values as a social worker? It could be very different. I played sports my whole life, so I had a value in collaboration. We talked about nationality. This is important to speak about. It's a little bit uncomfortable, but I think it's necessary when we're talking about experience. For me, I grew up in a middle-class suburban neighborhood where the most Black people that I saw in one day were in my house, okay? True story, true story. And so because of these experiences, I definitely had lots of experiences with racism growing up. And this is not that long ago. I can recall times and experiences where I've had bricks thrown through my family's bay window when I was a teenager. I can recall playing outside in my front yard and people driving down the street saying, "Get the F out of Lakewood, N-word, okay, niggers." People saying that. These things happen. And this is just as early as the 2000s. This wasn't in 1960 something or 1955. No, this happened in the 2000s. So what's the value that I learned from that? Well, that irrespective of how smart I am or how successful I am, I can expect that there will be people in this world who do not like me because of my skin color. That is my experience. It may not be yours. You may not have had that experience, but it's certainly mine. Lastly, my parents, of course, my father grew up rural poor. My mother grew up city poor, first generation college students. So from them, I learned work ethic and determination. And as you can see, my religion has also played part in what values I've learned. So let's take about 7 minutes, okay? I would like for you guys to fill out your own circles. I do see another chat up. I'm gonna make sure that this is not a question for everyone. Okay, it's not for me. All right, fantastic. Let's take about 7 minutes to fill in your own circles. And again, you don't have to fill all of them out, and we're all gonna be different, but I really would like you just to take a moment and think about how has my experience impacted my values. And so I'll let you guys go ahead and do that, and I'll just be sitting here nice and quiet. If you have any questions, please feel free to shoot me a chat or chime in.
Jennifer, Christy Mannering did send out a note to everyone saying if you didn't receive the worksheet, check your spam folder. We did send it to Ag All yesterday.
Okay.
So it went to Ag All yesterday afternoon, and check your spam folder if you don't have it in that Ag All message. And the subject was reminder, First Friday Diversity Workshop was the subject. Thanks.
Thank you. Give you guys about another 2 minutes or so to kind of fill in your circles. You guys are lucky because if I had you in person, I'm able actually to see people and ask you to participate and share one of your circles, but we won't do that today. So you guys are lucky you're on the other side of the computer, so you're off the hook this time. Okay, so let's bring it back in. Okay, I hope that in doing an activity like this, one, it helped you look at yourself in a way that you might not have looked at yourself in that way. Yes, of course, I'm a social worker, so I am going back to the feels and we're getting all deep with the emotions, but it's necessary, and self-awareness is very important in understanding not only yourself, but how your values and who you are impact and intersect with the world. That's how we become better people. That's how we treat people well. And that's how we can create and support environments that are for everyone, is by looking at ourselves. What I wanted you to gather from this activity essentially is thinking about, well, how this question that you see here at the bottom, how do these aspects of your programming influence your behavior on the job? Whether we want to believe it or not, the way that we were groomed, our experiences have an impact, and we can often bring those things into the workplace. It happens. So for me, myself, all of my experiences, you see that it has helped me be more open, relatable, a team player, drive, work ethic. Someone may have a completely different set of values and impact in the workplace. That second question, thinking about that, well, how much do you know about the cultural programming of your coworkers, of your boss, of your staff? Quite simply, when we get to know one another, it helps us provide better understanding for who people are and why they behave the way that they do. When we go a little bit further into this, after this activity, this leads into my next point. You and diversity. Understanding diversity essentially starts with understanding yourself first. When we have better self-understanding of who we are, what our biases are, what our values are, and how they impact us, and we have awareness of these things, that is going to help us not only improve, but have better determination and essentially empower ourselves. We empower ourselves by saying, okay, I know that this is my value. From the door, I know this is who I am, and I know when certain things may threaten that or make me feel uncomfortable. Is it my value that I'm having an issue with, or my bias, or is it that individual, right? When we can empower ourselves and be more aware of ourselves, quite simply, it helps us empower others and be more aware of who they are. So that's how we intersect diversity. We are all diversity. What we need to know here, coming toward the end of this workshop, is that we have to lead with cultural competency. And what that means is I'm able to operate in a different cultural context than my own. And I can be open and flexible to difference, okay? Yes, we all like to operate within our own silos and the things that make us feel comfortable. However, in the world that we live in and the demographics changing as they are, we have to be able to relate and adapt to people that are different than us. A quick example I want to use here, I did a workshop a couple of weeks back, and a really wonderful woman shared her story. It was a Christian woman, and she had just moved to the East Coast. It was Christmas time. She had no family. Her next door neighbors are Muslim, and they came to her house on Christmas Day, knocked on her door and said, "We know that it's your Christian holiday. We're Muslim, but we would love to invite you over for dinner since we know that you're alone." This was one of the best experiences this woman ever had. She essentially told me how she was able to talk to these people about their religion. She talked about her own religion and really found better understanding of who they were. And at the end of the day, they were able to pray together. She told me she prayed to her God, they prayed to their God, and they did this together in unison. And that's just a small example. If she hadn't been open or flexible or said, "No, I'm a Christian, so I cannot be with you on Christmas because you're Muslim," she would have missed a really awesome opportunity to meet really kind and valuable people. That's just a small example of operating within a different cultural context. I'm not Jewish, but if I know that's your holiday, I have no problem saying to someone, "Hey, happy Hanukkah," even though I'm a Christian. That's okay. What we want you to do, though, is to have cultural sensitivity and awareness. What we're saying here is we are acknowledging that there are differences and similarities, but we're not putting a value on it. I'm not saying that my way is better than your way or your way is worse than my way. No, it's just simply acknowledging that our ways are different, and that's okay. We need to get to a place where we can be more aware and understand each other's ethnic and cultural differences. That's important. When we have both of these things, cultural competency and sensitivity and awareness, quite frankly, we create inclusion where people feel valued and included for who they are. What I want you guys to know about this here in leveraging diversity, using your emotional IQ, okay? Being aware of yourself, your expressions, and how you're relating to other individuals. That can be in verbal and nonverbal interaction, but being aware of it, taking a chance to go outside of the words that we speak and noticing how well are we interacting with others. And then lastly, using that empathy. What is empathy? Quite simply putting the shoe on the other foot. I may not agree with what you're doing. I may not get what you're going through, but I will at least try to understand and respect your feelings. When we use this emotional IQ diversity model, it's one, starting with our self-awareness. So that bubble that I had you guys fill out, that's an example of using our self-awareness. Then checking our emotions at the door. Am I placing my values onto someone else? Okay? That's not okay. Actually, the only people that we are allowed to do that to are our children. They have to listen to us at least until they're 18, right? Or at least until they're out of college and not using our money anymore. But checking our emotions at the door. Is it fair to do that to our colleagues or the people that we work with and making them responsible for our personal values? Absolutely not. Using cultural competency, which again is just being open, being flexible, and willing to understand and connect with people that are different than us. And then lastly, allying and advocating. What does that mean? When you know better, you do better. So that is standing up for what is right. When we see people in our workplace making sexist or racist or homophobic jokes, it's saying, no, that's not okay. Even though we may not be a woman, or we may not be LGBTQ, or we may not be an ethnic minority or of a different religion, we cannot allow things that bring negative energy into our spaces, irrespective of what group is being negatively targeted or focused on. We have to ally and advocate for these people and the colleagues around us. What I want to focus on here and going forward is something called the strengths perspective, how we can better leverage diversity and difference. And we're saying here, oftentimes in our society, we are so focused on deficiencies and how people don't fit into our model, or what you're not doing right, or how you're not doing it how I would do it. When in fact, if we changed our lens to focus on individuals and saying, what strength does this person bring to the team? Every single person, even the most difficult people, okay, even the bad apples, they have something that's good about them. There is something that each of us can contribute, and that's called using the strengths perspective. When we do that, when we look at individuals at their strengths as opposed to looking at their deficiencies, quite simply now we're looking at a room and a boatload of opportunity for us to be successful. Applying that perspective to everyone helps us change the lens and how we see our world, and is going to better help us adapt and problem solve to the ways our environment changes. What I want to leave you guys with here, what are the takeaways? The first that I want you to remember is that who you are, what your social identity is, absolutely shapes the way you see your world. That's important. The way that you see your world, the next person to you on your left and on your right, they're going to have a different way of seeing their world. And it's all going to be about, where do we fall on that diversity wheel that I showed you earlier? The next is, we don't want you to place values on cultural differences or similarities. Again, saying we can acknowledge that things are different or that we're the same, but it stops there. We don't place a value system on it. Moving into the next takeaway, you have to be open and flexible, okay? If we stay rigid and locked in a box, well, quite simply, you're going to miss out on a lot of experiences, a lot of different ways of learning and being able to do new things, and honestly, a lot of great people, okay? There are a lot of great people. There are bad people in the world too, but there are great people in the world, but we have to give an opportunity to difference and learning to connect with others. When we say diversity, diversity means everyone, not just the ethnic minorities. Diversity is you, all of you looking at me right now. You are all diversity, and that's what I want you to remember. And then lastly, leaving us with, we all have strengths, every last one of us. If we change our lens to focus on what people can contribute to our teams and how they can make us stronger, quite simply, we are going to have better working environments. What I will leave you here with, these are my colleagues. That's me over here in the corner, okay? If you need to contact me, email me, call me. I am absolutely open and flexible to that. We have an open door policy here at OEI, so please feel free to reach out if you would like to follow up or have any concerns. And I would like to thank all of you guys for your time. I believe you should have an evaluation sheet that was emailed to you as well. If you have criticisms, don't put your name on it. But if you have criticisms, concerns, or you want to tell me great things, I'm open to that as well. And so thank you very much, Michelle, for having me. This was a wonderful experience, and I look forward to seeing you guys again in a month for part 2.
Jennifer, before everybody signs off, I'd like to ask everyone just to go into the chat pod and just type your name into the chat pod, because it's one way we can know who's there. And for our extension staff, we're going to be documenting our participation in this for our affirmative action and civil rights files that we're making an effort to educate and inform our staff, which is one of our goals, but also so we can follow up as needed and we'll know. So I just ask everybody who's participating just to go into that chat pod and type in your name that you participated today. And Jennifer, I'd like to thank you for wrapping it up with those key points and for the positive approach to which you bring to this perspective. And I think so often the training has been, and our response to this has been, that negative approach. And so I just want to thank you for the positive approach you bring to this. And I think it's a model that many of us can wrap our hands around and respond to. So we'll look forward to you being with us in May. Thanks for doing it by Zoom. Thanks for being an innovator here and stepping into something you haven't done before and doing it.
Thank you.
We did have over 44 people involved, and so for us, this is a great way to communicate across the state, and thank you for doing this by Zoom. So thanks everyone for participating. Please do step into the chat and type your name, and that's part of our recording, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you as we move to this positive model in our next session. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.